Guy Maddin, welcome to the Directors.
Oh, thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Truly, looking at your movies, one is stunned by their originality, by how they're different than anything else one sees anywhere. And the first question is, how did you ever develop that sensibility?
I think everyone's a plagiarist a little bit, and maybe I'm just looking more carefully for. I'm just stealing from different people or something. I've my entire life been an incurable nostalgia-phile, and I've been theorizing out loud about why the other day. I think it's because I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, youngest by far, and I sort of grew up in a sort of a hands-off nurturing strategy.
Hands-off nurturing?
Well, yeah, I was brought home the same day as the television set, and we were both we were both just plunked on the floor together and faced off for the next 10 years or so. But you know, during rerun season, I would go through family albums, and that's when I discovered in old black and white photos all my other siblings and younger versions of them packed into a station wagon with young versions of my parents and a family dog, all going on happy, traveling trips and doing all sorts of wonderful things. And I didn't seem to be on any of these trips because I wasn't born yet. And it just seemed like all the great things seemed to happen in the period up to, but not including my birth or something. So I spent a lot of time mythologizing about the past. And then as I just flipped through picture books, too lazy to read them or ever do any research, a habit I have to this day, actually. I just started getting more and more intoxicated by old photographs, paintings, drawings, and other people's myths and things. So,
it started when you were a very young person, then?
I think right from the beginning, just to do any self-analysis. So, what turns my crank is different from what turns other filmmakers on, and so I think if I am influenced by or ripping off other sources, it's just not the same as those other people that you think about when you're comparing me to the others.
Did you have an intent? A lot of people grow up and say, when I get out of high school, I'm going to go to the Rhode Island School of Filmmaking, or the Hollywood Repertory Company or something. That wasn't your start.
No, I've lived life very passively and very happily.
I don't believe that for a second, by the way.
No, I swear it. All my relationships have been, I've been too passive. I feel like instead of taking control of my life, I just rest my hands on a Ouija board, and not only do my hands drift where other people will it, but my whole course of action. I'm starting to learn to be a little more proactive, and as a result, my scripts are getting a little more proactive and zestier and fast-moving, and I'm quite pleased with it. So pretty soon I'll be fully seated behind the steering wheel and, matting it.
You haven't been driving these?
No, I've been drifting most of my life, and I kind of been extremely lucky where the currents have taken me, but I can't count on luck all the time. I'm smart enough to know that, so I'm going to start, steering a little bit.
Your life, though, really seems to be so connected with your art. Stupid thing to say, but maybe everybody's life is connected with their art, but yours seems to be more deeply connected somehow.
Well, I kind of try to make a point of tapping into my own biography as often as possible. It's the only thing I can do, really, without doing a lot of research. I just know myself. I don't have to do research on myself. And so I really love family melodramas, that genre of fiction. And I really believe that almost all stories are more or less melodrama, in the same way that philosophical dictum goes, everything tastes more or less like chicken. Yeah. Our stories are more or less melodramatic, heightened. And so I just, whenever I'm trying to think of a plot twist to spring into one of my scripts, I just think back. I run it through my own life just to see if it would solve properly, if it seemed plausible, and however far-fetched it may be, if it's psychologically plausible, that's fine. Even just going back to old Greek plays or Greek myths, Medea after slaying her own children and then rising up in a dragon-drawn chariot of rage, is obviously physically impossible, the latter part, and the first part may seem psychologically implausible or very extreme, but obviously there are hints of diluted Medea in every bitter child custody battle and divorce, and so it's just that one passes the melodramatic plausibility test, and so I just run a similar test for my stories, just based on my own life, which, lucky enough for me, has many salient, strange features in its history.
One of them, and you did one of your early films about that, had to do with your father.
Yeah, my father died, which isn't very strange, but
how old were you?
21. So maybe just, not a kid, but I got gypped out of a few years, I feel. And I guess at the time, it was probably, my relationship with him it was never bad, but it was just him nagging me to be more ambitious, and me, sort of putting up vague complaints that he should quit bugging me. And that was kind of just where I was left hanging when he died suddenly. And so it was a lot of unfinished business, I felt. And soon after, I received almost nightly visits from him in dreams, something I've found is very common among people who experience a loss, either through death or getting romantically dumped, or just a separation from a home or something. You just dream that things are as they once were. And the dreams were really bittersweet, because I'd quite often argue with my dad in the dreams, or beg him to stay while he grew increasingly impatient with my family and went on to live with a better family. And then there was waking up and realizing that he really was dead. But it was nice to see him again, and so the feelings really were a tingly mixture of creepiness and warmth and love and despair and all the great things that really good art are to me. And so my first attempt at making a movie was just to make a primitive filmic poem about those feelings. And I just went about it in a very straightforward fashion. I just had a guy with a dead father, just kept revisiting him, but not in dreams. A father who just kept forgetting he was dead and just coming back, and then getting impatient and going away again. And I really feel I've gotten to know my father a lot better, although it's a fake version, just a shoddy facsimile of my father that I've gotten to know in the years since then. But
do we really know anybody except through shoddy facsimile?
Exactly. I'm just knowing my own version of him, and we've grown to like each other quite a bit. But he's starting to fade now, and he's been replaced more recently in dreams by a dead aunt, who died more recently, and who I also feel I wasn't loving properly while she was alive. So I'm making up for it now, and I've been quite good to her lately.
I wonder if one of the unusual things about you, compared with a lot of people, is we're all confronted by dreams and specters and notions, fantasies that most of us probably say hello to at the door and then shut them out.
Yeah, it's true. I try to strike up conversations with people about dreams, and a lot of people say they just don't even remember their dreams, or they don't have dreams, or especially nightmares.
Right. But you engage them.
Yeah, and after a while, you even grow to love them. That one scared me, and I have some recurring nightmares that are just so terrifying. And I wake up screaming, but I was on some medication for a while that just has nothing to do with my sanity, I assure you, but a neurological infection that I got, and it resulted in my sleeping so deeply that I failed to remember my dreams for a couple of years, and boy did I miss them. And so I started taking myself off the medication, and the dreams came back, the nightmares came back, and I was never happier.
I wouldn't think a person would want to have.
Yeah, well, you really do miss something without that dream life somehow. It's the tuning fork for the coming day. What did I just dream of? You've got to admit it. Some days you wake up and there's just a slowly melting embrace that you've crushed. That lasts till noon or so, and other days maybe a bristling terror. I don't know. It's just, otherwise all my days would be the same, especially since I'm self-employed.
During these summer weeks, it became apparent that my father wasn't quite dead in the traditional sense. brief recoveries became common. In a voice I can't remember, he would make various vague requests. I had nothing to do with this new fragile kind of life. If anything, I resisted the idea until I could resist it no longer.
The directors will return in a moment.
In the sense that, again, most people, you speak to them, the word bristling as an adjective doesn't come up that often.
I think I always wanted to be a hockey play-by-play announcer, but I just don't have a radio voice, and it just wouldn't happen. I know I never read at all as a child, nor did I skate, and because my father was involved with the hockey team, that was a source of incredible shame for me. I was quite often among new school chums chosen to be the team captain because of my last name on some floor hockey team or something that couldn't play properly or anything. And so I finally decided to confront that demon, but as a young adult. I think at age 18, I went to Canadian Tire and bought a pair of $9 skates or something and just went out and started skating, became obsessed with it. I'm usually a person of one obsession at a time, and I made that the winter of learning to play hockey, and by the end of that year I was on a team, and I'm still to this day ridiculously proud of that fact that I came to it late. And I made up for the fact that I never really read as a kid by making that a new obsession when I was in my mid-20s, just sitting down with a big pile of books and working my way through. And
what sort of books?
And it made me really obnoxious. The first book I read was one of Vladimir Nabokov's lesser novels, Bend Sinister, and it took me months to read this thing. I was reading about one page in 3 hours or so and looking up every third word in the dictionary, and then I just started picking up the pace, and I read most of his books, and then I just started going from there in all different directions. And I need a new obsession right now. I still try to read, but I just don't read like that one great year where I read a lot.
What the obsession might be.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm always looking. I went through a vintage music obsession. I went through an obsession in general with the 1920s. Filmmaking was an obsession for me. Now it's kind of, it's cooled to something I can do without losing my head. And with each obsession, you become insufferably arrogant about it, and you really feel that you and your obsession are what the entire solar system should be revolving around. And so
That's right.
I'm kind of glad I don't have one right now. I probably sound bad enough as it is, but
terrible.
Yeah. But I do miss having an obsession. So we'll see.
Tell me about the filmmaking obsession, because it seems to me you had no idea how to make a movie.
No.
Did you even know how to, turn on a movie camera?
No, I'd never taken a successful Christmas snapshot. I'd made a few attempts, but they were dismal.
What in heaven's name gave you the idea that you could be a filmmaker?
Well, I think from my reading obsession, the natural desire to come out of that is that you'd want to be a writer, but I think I was just smart enough to know I could never be a good writer. I knew that all the great writers were people that had been reading since the age of 2 or 3, and that I just didn't have the weight behind, the way Wayne Gretzky was skating from age 3 in his own backyard, and I just knew as a latecomer my skating style was too bizarre and my reading and writing was too uneven. So I thought, having seen a number of very primitively put together films by clever people, where the effect was like primitive music, I knew that I wouldn't have to be, that my lack of sophistication as a writer wouldn't be held against me if I just took the ideas I had and filmed them instead of tried to write them down. And just emboldened by some early primitive experimental pictures, Louis Buñuel's Chien Andalou, L'Âge d'Or, stuff, all film school staples, Maya Deren pictures, where I realized that, you know, shoddy 16mm production values weren't being held against the power or supposed power of these movies. And so I knew I could just go out and make all sorts of mistakes and incorporate them into the aesthetic of the movie. And so it was just a matter of going out with trial and error and doing it. I had a fellow come out and be my camera operator, but he quit after one day, and he was too depressed, he wouldn't get out of bed. And so I told him, well, the least you can do is show me how to work the camera. And I was prepared for some horrible 3-hour-long lesson, but it took about a minute. And really? I went out and just shot everything myself after that. It was fun. And actually, just to follow through on that thought, it was always held against me that I was my own camera operator on my own movies, and I was always told, no, you've got to get a camera operator, and they are very handy, obviously, camera operators. So many great movies have been made with a director sitting in a chair with a megaphone or a video assistant. And a camera operator, but it's nice to see some big name and highly successful directors doing their own camera work now too, because there's lots to be said for just seeing what you want and then just moving the camera where you want without having, just on the impulse. And
don't have to translate for somebody else.
Right, so most recently, Steve Soderbergh's Traffic was shot by Soderbergh.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and Lars von Trier does his own camera on Dancer in the Dark and probably on his other pictures, I'm not sure. And going back into the 30s, Joseph von Sternberg shot all those Marlene Dietrich movies himself as well as directed them. So he's looking through the camera and doing the movements. So it's a great thing if you don't really know exactly what you're doing. Now in those, I think in the cases of those three people, those are control freaks who really knew what they were doing, but I don't know what I'm doing half the time. So it's nice just to wing it and improvise.
What did you expect would happen with these early movies? Did you, for example, Tales from the Gimli Hospital.
Right.
A very interesting and unusual story.
Yeah.
But what hopes did you have for it? What expectations?
It takes a while to make the movie, especially I was making it on zero budget. I think in 1988 dollars, it was $20,000. So whatever that is now, you know. But well, you go through a range of expectations. There are these arrogant moments where you really think you're making the greatest movie in the world, and there are other moments where when you see a movie that resembles yours and bores you, and you get paranoid, and everything starts resembling your movie after a while, and bores you and disappoints you, you start despairing. And so you become an emotional metronome, clicking rapidly between despair and elation. And so by the time the picture comes out, you're not really surprised by anything that happens. So I got an incredible amount of good luck from it and wasn't surprised. And had it dropped into the abyss without anyone noticing, I wouldn't have been surprised either. Although I preferred the way it turned out.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that made you feel as if you could go on and do more.
Yeah, it probably made me pretty insufferable for a while, but I decided...
You don't need to use these negative terminology.
Well, I know self-loathing is a fuel that drives me. Don't worry. I've got cords of it stacked up back home. I packed lightly on this trip. But, no, I decided I would make a World War I epic based on this, on my first moderately successful feature. I thought I would make the ultimate war amnesia love story based on my theory that we're all amnesiacs and that amnesia is what enables us to get through each day. The very fact that we conveniently forget the horrible things we've done to our loved ones, to the very people that rely on us, to our employers, the way we've forgotten our duties, our loyalties.
I see where self-loathing comes in now.
Yeah, but we all have, and I can't remember specifically, thank God, because I'm as well anesthetized as everyone else. But every now and then you remember, and it's awful. But And some of my favorite movies use this amnesia technique. Vertigo, I guess, is the most prominent example, where Jimmy Stewart's character forgets his true love is dead, or wills himself to forget it. And I just remember, much like my dead father dreams, in which I kept on a nightly basis forgetting my father was actually dead, in a couple of romantically traumatic situations, you would forget for a few moments that you were actually out of a relationship that a little sooner than you'd rather have been,
and then it comes crashing in on you.
Yeah, and then you'd remember again, and it's that little temporary amnesia that buys you just a little bit of respite, that enables you to get on with the day and seem like a sane person, and maybe someday get another relationship going without seeming like a raving lunatic. Some people can't forget, and they become stalkers,
and so all these things worked into the...
Yeah, and just in a heightened form, you can make a melodrama, which is where you just take human nature and heighten aspects of it for your own thematic purposes. And so for this movie, I decided to make every character an amnesiac of some sort. And as a writer, along with my collaborator George Tolles, we set out this great interlocking grid of 7 major characters, each suffering a different form of amnesia. One person forgetting her wedding vows, another man forgetting his duty to his country, another guy forgetting his true love is dead, in a sort of a rip-off of Vertigo. And then when I set about directing it, I just sort of had so much glee about seeing these World War I costumes and everything. I think I forgot what my intentions as a screenwriter were. So as a director, I was an amnesiac of sorts, and everything was just sort of enveloped in forgetfulness. And the movie, as a result, is almost impossible to follow. It's almost impossible for a viewer to remember what just happened, and then ultimately to remember an enjoyable movie experience, probably, until I know that of all my movies has the highest walkout ratio of my all my festival screenings. Festival audiences will walk out because there's so many other options in the adjoining theater more quickly than regular
How do you
theaters.
feel if they do?
Well, I'm not one of those people that, is trying to defy an audience, so I didn't like it, but I had to take responsibility for it. I recognized I was just not making a narratively friendly movie, and it just made me want to go out and make another movie and make it narratively clear.
Sure.
The next time. I learned where to sit in a theater. If you want to watch with an audience, you have to sit in the front row so that the people who are walking out of your vision. Because the first time I sat in on Archangel, I decided I would stand at the back, but I ended up holding the door open for people as they were walking out, and they would recognize me from my introductory remarks. And
there would be unpleasantness.
Yeah. Good night.
Oh,
and then I would try timing it out in a local cafe, and just sit there for exactly 83 minutes and go back for the Q&A that follows every screening of the festival. But quite often you'd see people from the show coming into the cafe at the 20-minute mark and things like that.
What would they ask you after this movie was over?
Usually people who stay in the seats are, unless you've made them extremely angry, they're usually sympathetic or allies of some sort. And if they weren't with the picture, they might be just curious as to why you made such a thing, or they just want to see just what kind of hubris you're dealing in that enables you to get up on a stage after putting them through that sort of thing. But usually they're allies, and I actually do like the picture. I just feel it was just a few tinkerings away from being what I originally wanted it to be, but alas, I never did do those tinkerings. And so it's my little favorite child, which I never let out.
Love. What do we know of love? We know a baby loves with all its tiny heart, and is loved in return by hearts as simple and as pure. We know a growing child thrives on love, and with its generous limbs apportions that love to the rest of the world. We know that youth drenches itself with the perfume of its love, a wild, heedless love bordering on heroism. And the wise love placidly and deeply. One is said to love a place, a thing, an idea. You love your country and your liberty. And of course, there is the greatest love of all, that of a gentle soul in thoughtful prayer to God. Then there is pride or self-love, a malignant vanity, insatiable, the pride of the Teuton. Why must such a belligerent urge ravage all that is lovely and right? One must forgive, but a crime against humanity is a crime against God. One must have the discipline to fight for what is right in the Lord's eyes. We must restore peace to his earthly garden. For the love of God.
The directors will return in a
I
moment.
guess it's in a trench. And these people have their guns and they're in their military uniforms, and all of a sudden there are bunny rabbits everywhere.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
It's actually based in fact, a friend of mine that originally gave me the idea of making the movie Archangel, a friend named John Harvey, he acted in The Dead Father as the son. He told me of this battle. I think it involved Fenians or some sort of Irish tribe or something that were in a camp waiting at one night. Just everything was quiet, and then all of a sudden a stampede of bunny rabbits and squirrels came rushing through the camp, very quietly thumping. And what it was is the enemy were tippy-toeing through the bushes and chasing all the wildlife through without realizing it. There were so many of them that there was nowhere for these animals to scamper except into their enemy camp. And so it was a kind of a fluffy foreboding, this kind of harmless little presentiment of slaughter coming. And I kind of liked it, and I decided to just put it in the movie, but unexplained, because I thought it would be as puzzling to the viewer as it would be to the victims of such a sneak attack. And I thought it'd be kind of fun, and it worked out kind of nicely. We just rented 40 bunny rabbits and had them on set for about an hour only, and we just started releasing them one by one, and then finally the rest of them, and they would just thump down onto these sleeping soldiers, and then just collected them all up again and shipped them back to the Pets or Pantry or whatever it was.
There was that wonderful moment in the movie Magnolia. Did you see that, where the frogs fall out of the sky?
I felt like it was a nice companion piece.
Yeah.
On a more broadly distributed picture.
Maybe somebody was ripping you off.
Yeah, maybe.
What's your favorite?
My favorite picture?
Yeah.
I get asked that so often, and I don't really have an answer.
Such an unusual family, Yeah. I guess maybe that's why people might ask you, as opposed to, somebody who's in commercial movies, because they all are sort of a known, identifiable quantity. You know what the hell it is, and therefore how to feel about it. But how do you feel about this stuff? It's different. It's so unusual. I just don't know how, as the owner of those images and those ideas.
So what's the favorite of my own?
Yeah.
I feel the movie Careful came closest to achieving what I set out to achieve of my features. And I made a short most recently for the Toronto Film Festival, The Heart of the World, which turned out exactly the way I planned, and I was so shocked that I couldn't believe it, and so it
got some excellent notices, is that right?
Yeah, it even turned out okay, so because I wanted it to be really good, and so and it turned out pretty much as I'd hoped. So there's hope for me yet. If I can do that with a feature, if I can have a batting average like that at a feature length, I'd be pretty pleased with myself.
I am late for my wedding.
Listen to my heart. It's dripping like a leaky tap ever since they punctured it.
Johan!
Mother.
Johan! Johan!
I like the genre of melodrama, family melodrama. I would like to make people think about their own pain and their own loves, and I'd like to make them laugh, but in a way that's off the compass somewhat.
Absurd.
Yeah, or just a way that isn't laugh out loud funny, but for some reason doesn't seems tragic enough to be funny or something. I don't know. It's just, I'll know it when I find it, but I'd like to grasp that and have a story that feels universal. I'm speaking in very general terms now, but I'd like to make it in my own fiercely personal style, so it'd be pretty primitive feeling, I think. But I think the reason I was giving you such a long background on how the general public is starting to embrace more primitive looks. Dancer in the Dark looked so murky. A few years ago, people would refuse to watch that movie in a mainstream theater. So I think I'd just like to put myself in a position where I could make an art house picture that actually crosses over a little bit and enjoys some commercial success. Not that I need the money or want it. It's one of my big flaws that I don't think of money ever, and as a result, find myself ludicrously poor at times. But it would be nice if a lot more people watched my pictures while I was still alive. I'm just assuming everyone will be watching them after I'm dead.
In one of the films that was made about you, as you were making
Twilight of the Ice Nymphs.
Twilight of the Ice Nymphs, you had what appeared to be a moment of genuine unhappiness about being in that profession at all. And you said, "This is it. It's my last movie. I'm not going to do this anymore."
Yeah.
Was that for real?
Yeah, it was for real. Just mostly on that picture for some reason. I felt a little bit out of control on that one.
Too big?
Yeah, maybe I just wasn't ready to go. And it wasn't that big, really. It was only $1.7 million or anything. But I think it caught me flat-footed for some reason, just the way a player will have a bad game now and then or something. And I'd been very lucky up until then, and for some reason the project caught me flat-footed. And my usual set of comfy collaborators weren't around in the same profusion. They were either busy or didn't get along with someone else or something. For whatever reason, I wasn't working with the same people, and so I'm, as a person who is spoiled by just being in the comfiest, most passive situation, I all of a sudden found a bunch of things coming at me I didn't like, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So.
Was that the first time that you worked with name actors, with sort of folks from out of town who were...
I guess so. I'd worked with a guy named Paul Cox, who was a great Australian director, and he had a small part in Careful, and his wife at the time, Gosia Dobrowolska, had won some Australian Oscars and things, and she was really good, and she worked in that picture as well. But it was the first time with people that North Americans would recognize right off the bat. You know, Shelley Duvall, everyone recognized her from those stills called From the Shining. And Frank Gorshin, I sure recognized because I loved him and wanted to be the Riddler when I was a kid. And it was fun. And there was certainly nothing wrong with working with those people. That was a pleasure. And the way the dialogue is written in all my movies, they're really stylized. They're almost fairy tale dialogue lines, and so everyone gets onto this acting monorail. And so no matter how much experience you have, a lot or a little, everyone seems to get on board stylistically, and it enables me to be a director of camera effects, more of performances. The way I've set up my movies, I'm not an actor's director in the sense that. Say Sean Penn is, who really wants the performances, and or the way the Dogma directors are. All those jump cuts which cut out every little performance blemish really make for a performer-friendly kind of filmmaking. Mine isn't necessarily kind to performers, and I'm very grateful to performers who are willing to put their necks out the way they do when they step in front of my camera. When I'm more worried about what's sparkling in the background and things like that.
A lot sparkles in that movie.
Yeah, so I try to get things sparkling. I really became close with Alice Kriega, who was a performer in there, and through her, I'd like to work with her again, and I've got little scripts written for her. She said she'd work for me for nothing someday, so I'll take her up on it.
The directors will.
I wanted to see you again.
Like this? Did you guess how easy it would be?
If I said I thought it would be easy, would you be insulted?
Do you want to insult me?
Not for anything in the world.
So you did guess?
I'll tell you something. It's not because I knew it would be easy to have you. Because I don't love you.
Don't you?
No. I love another.
I suppose you know your own mind. After all, you've spent many years with your mind as your only companion.
How long have I been fucking you?
Now you're not so afraid to insult me. Why did you use that word?
But you're the one that said it. Please don't repeat it.
Are you losing yourself again?
I forgive you. You're being suddenly alone like this.
If I were to tell you all my thoughts about the white-plumed heron, I should become tiresome to you.
Tide's gone out.
I've heard so many people say that when you're pregnant, you become more sensitive and caring. It's true. I've simply become more carnal, more careless. I've just become more. The afternoon I met you, I gave my ring to the statue on a whim.
I don't believe you.
Do you see it anywhere? I'll fetch it back one of these days.
Why did you do that?
To challenge the gods, to see what's out there.
Just the way you've been talking, I gather that an idea for a film can start in some far-off corner of your dream world or your imagination and just get built onto the way an artist might start putting dots on a canvas.
It does sort of accrete somehow. I remember thinking of Buñuel's famous eyeball slash, and he always just called it an eye-opener for the audience. But I started thinking of it as something it's intensely irritating to viewers. When you watch that movie with people, they just, to a person, they cringe like crazy. It's impossible to watch an eyeball being cut open with people cringing. And then the movie proceeds from there without ever returning to that eyeball. And it seemed to be an irritant planted at the beginning of the film, and then like a little grain of sand irritating an oyster, something, nacreous builds up, you hope, and something shimmery and beautiful. And so I've always tried to plant a little irritant in the premise of my stories. For Archangel, I thought I was being quite mischievous by making a pro-war movie. Right. But by the time it came out, the Persian Gulf War had started, and George Bush had a 97% approval rating, and everyone was bloodthirsty, and it wasn't an irritant to anybody. Everyone was loving it. For Careful, my mountain picture, I just wanted to make a mountain picture. Mountains are so exotic to me, and I felt like no one else knew any more about mountains than I did, but I was just such a Winnipeg hick. But my collaborator, George Tolles, wanted to make a pro-incest picture. And so we decided to...
Pro-incest?
Yeah, so he got incest on my mountain, and I got, and vice versa. And so we decided to make
You came up with the idea of everybody being afraid to have climaxes for fear of starting it. Come on. Who thinks of these things?
Well, George is a very fast writer, and he was coming up with so many story twists. I didn't quite understand the reason for any of them. And then I said, well, why are you, just back up here a minute, why are you making this story this way and not any other way? The story seemed to be going all over the place. And then he just said, well, I just picture a world in which everyone on these mountains have to walk so carefully for they'll slide off or something. And just when I heard the word careful, I realized that was the banner under which I would operate for the movie, and it just became its title, that it would be an imperative to be careful, and lest something will happen. And while he was working in his pro-incest manifestos, just to be mischievous, and that was the irritant around which we were hoping to build our pearl, I started just at work on making this melodrama, and you can never really control where a movie goes entirely. And it ended up, I feel, being not a pro-incest, but a pro-repression movie, which suited me fine anyway, because by accident completely, I made a movie that many Canadian reviewers were able to see as a national portrait or something, just of our own caution, our over-caution. And whenever anyone decides to act upon an impulse to ignore repressive taboos, they're immediately Old Testamently punished with death and death by plummet or self-mutilation or something horrible befalls them. So I was happy to make my little portrait of Canada by accident. And that's the way it should.
Of course, that's the only way to do it.
It is. Otherwise, it's too programmed. And but I'm here admitting that this program that was projected onto it by other people seems to sit well with it. I think it just comes from being true to your own autobiography. You know, just saying, would I do that? Yeah, I would. And I'm a Canadian, so there it is.
What are you working on now?
Right now, I'm in development of shooting a ballet, of all things, the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. Mark Godden, who lives in Montreal, choreographed Dracula for the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, and I'm going to be shooting that. And I'm working on another script, a feature script of my own, with George, my collaborator, and the person who pointed out which books to read way back when I became obsessed with reading. And so I always hear his voice when I'm reading a book, either reading the words out loud to me or over my shoulder commenting on a phrase that's bad or good. So he and I are working on a feature right now that's still in its first trimester, and so it's way too early to bring it out into the air.
We'll, however, be watching for it.
Yeah, I hope it gets out.
That's the thing. You got to market these things.
Yeah, I've got to. I'm behind the driver's wheel.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Guy Maddin.